Europe right around 1914, just prior to the outbreak of what they called the Great War then and what we call World War One. And you can see the concentration of nations that had unified together in Italy, Austria-Hungary, and Germany, the massive empire of Russia, Great Britain, France, Spain, and all the like, the Ottoman Empire as well. These particular maps show you that the trend was countries forming large-scale empires in order to be able to combine their strength and their resources together. But they didn't know it. These nations were on a collision course for war, and we're going to look at the underlying causes of World War One today. And the first one being imperialism. Remember where one nation, a larger nation, attempts to exploit smaller nations. That's what we call imperialism. And one of the reasons for doing that was resources, the ability to fuel the industrial machines that they needed to provide food to a population that was growing in size. These nations desperately needed the resources to continue coming. What happens, though, when two nations are vying for the same resources? Last chapter, we saw what happened with Japan and Russia both fighting to be able to exploit China and Korea. And so, imperialism, these nations are competing for resources and they become frustrated at one another in terms of how this will lead to war. So, that's one of our underlying causes here. Many of these European nations are vying for the same stuff. The second cause for World War in 1914 is going to be a system of alliances. Nations thought they were guaranteeing their security by making deals with other nations to come to their defense. And there's going to be two main alliances that come into play here. What you see, the first alliance is what we call the Triple Alliance between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, these nations in Central Europe. Germany had kind of formed this particular alliance because they knew that everyone was concerned with them and what they might do. So they formed an alliance of nations between Central Europe. And so you get this promise here. But later on, when war breaks out, you're going to find out Italy is going to abandon this particular alliance. Italy and Victor Emmanuel III, and we'll talk about the circumstances later on, but later they would claim that Germany and Austria-Hungary provoked this war, so they peace out on the Triple Alliance right as the war starts. But Germany and Austria-Hungary, they're going to get a new ally. They bring in the Ottoman Empire, that empire in the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire was kind of like Austria-Hungary in a way. They were trying to hang on to whatever power they had left, and they saw this as an opportunity to potentially gain some land back that they had lost. So this is going to make up the Triple Alliance, and during the war, they end up being called the Central Powers. Because you get Austria-Hungary and Germany there in Central Europe, and if you go through Central Europe south, eventually you'll run into the Middle East and the Ottoman Empire. And Germany had also forged ties. Kaiser Wilhelm II, whom you see there, Wilhelm II had also worked on providing infrastructure, including a railroad that went from European nations over through the Ottoman Empire to exploit, or not necessarily exploit the Ottoman Empire, but connect the two nations to bring about trade and prosperity for both of them. So it makes sense that the Ottoman Empire would jump in on this particular side. The other major alliance, Great Britain, France, and Russia, Team Red, White, and Blue. You see the leaders here. It's not important that you necessarily remember them, but it's okay to throw their names out there just to kind of appreciate that. Great Britain, the Prime Minister and the monarch share some power. In France, George Clemenceau is that guy with a great mustache. And you see, of course, Tsar Nicholas II, who are on this team who kind of surround Germany and Austria-Hungary on both sides. All right. Now, the problem with this is what ends up being a world war could have been limited in scale, but alliances, once one nation gets involved in the conflict, the others are going to feel obligated to jump in. Okay? Another underlying cause for World War I, militarism. The fact that nations were arming themselves and building up new and deadlier weapons meant that other nations got concerned. So when you see your neighbor producing more and more weaponry and moving that weaponry around, that concerns you. You want to know, well, why is my neighbor beefing up their military? And so you feel obliged to do the same thing. One of the things that actually builds up the militarism, which sparks it, is an American book. This gentleman right here was an American Navy man by the name of Alfred Thayer Mahan. And he wrote a particular book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And spoiler alert, it's about how having a strong navy helps make a nation great in terms of its power and strength. And ultimately, this book is read by a lot of world leaders, and it causes them to increase production in their navy. The fact that many of these nations had colonies meant they understood the importance of a navy to begin with, and this only influences them more to increase the number of resources going to their militaries, especially the navy. Kaiser Wilhelm thought this was such an important book. He had a copy, it was mandatory for a copy to be placed on any German ship. Now, another thing to show you here too, and you don't need to remember statistics, but an increase in defense expenditures from the years prior to the war, you see how militarism, nations are increasing the amount of money they spend on their militaries. And one thing you have to remember, if nations are spending their tax dollars on beefing up their military, then ultimately that means they can't spend it in ways that might be more productive, like helping their citizenry. Okay? Nationalism is also going to be another major cause for war. Remember, that's that extreme pride in one's country, where one nation thinks that they are better than others, that they're the best country in the world, and that they always do things the best way, and that they have a right to be more powerful than others. And that presents a problem when you get many of these nations who have a strong sense of nationalism. They think they're entitled to call the shots in world affairs. They think they're entitled to colonies and resources, and that will create a huge problem here in World War I. Our last underlying cause is racism. People think that racism is something that's unique to the United States, and this isn't true at all. You see here in Europe, the European nations, but within right south of Austria, Hungary in particular, a lot of those nations, there's a heavy presence of what we call Slavs. If you look at this little map right here, it shows you the breakdown of races in areas that are just north of Greece and the Ottoman Empire, and the Slavic people, people from Eastern Europe. Ultimately, if you want to remember or know what a Slav is, and you can see the breakdown of different colors there, but if a person has a Russian-sounding name, they're probably Slavic. Now, the Slavs, they got a lot of beef with the Germanic people, people living in Austria, Hungary, and Germany. Those Germanic people and Slavs come from different tribes in Europe throughout history, and they've had a lot of bad blood. They don't like each other one bit. And so when Slavic nations and Germanic nations are at each other's throat, it only makes the conflict all the more likely. Okay? Next video, we'll talk about the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and how that is going to be the match that lights the fire of World War I.